The 440 is almost home. This vehicle is a bit of a bitzer. We believe it was originally made as a 6-cylinder column shift, and obviously that is not a 6-cylinder. The owner bought it with the 440 in it, and a 727 in it. So when it come to me late 2019, the build sheet said we're going to add some boost. He does have a big blower for this, but he wanted something a little bit left field. So we wanted that old school 80s looking retro tech sort of a feel about it. The power is really an inconsequential sort of byproduct. Obviously it's got to make horsepower, and that's a good thing, don't get me wrong, but it had to look the right part. So I had a bit of fun. I made log manifolds. It's got twin Garrett 3076s, twin Turbo Smart wastegates. I added an electric water pump, Turbo Smart reg. I bought an Edelbrock intake manifold from USA and rail kit. I messed around, made an LS throttle body fit, and did some tricky things. Not on there at the moment. I made a crank trigger kit, and with a bit of stuffing around, I modified, don't tell anybody, a Jeep part that fitted in there. So now I've got a cam sync sensor. I got the original distributor. Actually, I think I bought an eBay one. Gutted it, machined it, got that dropped in, bolted in, used the original clamp. It looks very stock-like, but instead of having a big MSD up here with all the wires hanging off it, this is what we've got. I used the heater hose circuit to run coolant to the turbos, and in under this guard is a cooler for that to just try and scrub some extra heat, because this thing with its big capacity and large displacement does generate a lot of water temperature. I mounted the LS coils on the back firewall. We did look at mounting them on here, but it looked junk and it messed with the nice clean lines of the rocker cover, and putting them on the manifold it just looked also junk, so I mounted them there. Not super happy with them, but I may even redo the wiring at some point. It's kind of messed with my OCD. I didn't add any holes in the side. Probably easier to point this way. There's a factory air hole here. One of the guys is in this vehicle in factory form. It had a tube that went from there on either side up to the airbox. So when this hits home, the wastegate pokes just straight through there. It's got a nice little dumpy that screams from the atmosphere, goes down outside the chassis rail. I did actually had to cut two holes in the body. I didn't really want to, but I had nowhere else to do it, so I cut them down low, so if somewhere down the track someone wants to revert this thing back to stock, they can actually do that. I've just put two holes, one on either side for the boost pipes, and I did a really, really small shave along the front here to make the intercooler fit, and a little bit over here behind the latch. The car came from America with these in it, so they remained. It also came with the Monster tack on a whole bunch of gauges inside, which I then added some other bits to. We'll get to that in a minute. It is still American drive, so thankfully it doesn't have power steering, so we don't have a big horrible power steering pump to deal with and the big power head down there. The motors on these, most people don't know, actually sit off center. So if you draw a center line here from the center of the grille and down the car, the crankshaft sits about there. Plain and simply for the steering column to fit. Causes fair few issues on this side with space, on the passenger side. It gets very, very tight. We're very, very close with the manifold on the tower. It's very, insanely tight. Can't have studs on the manifold because you can't get the manifold off. So I have to run bolts. Makes it awkward. And again, there's the port where the wastegate dumps through. Exhaust, because of the high mounts, just parallels along the side of the rocker cover and dumps down the back, down the firewall. Made this tricky little sticker to match this vehicle. Looks very stock-like, that was the idea. This has got a very, very nice, cool 1980s muscle car sort of style with the log manifold, and obviously we've got the retro tech of the intake manifold and the fuel rails. Around the front you'll notice there's a nice little nitro solenoid there, just for a bit extra punch, just in case you need it, those days happen. So she's got some pretty big bags on her. This come like this from the States. This car's been in Australia, I don't know, 20 years or more. It does have an 8 3/4 diff, so if somebody has an 8 3/4 lying around they'd like to sell with like a Detroit locker or some kind of nice setup in it that they'd like to sell, please get in contact with me. There's the giggle gas. I put a surge tank there with twin pumps on it. I used the original lift pump to fill that. That took a bit of fun. The factory tank was not very conducive to adding extra lines. The battery was mounted here somewhere from memory on a steel frame, which I didn't like because it had no boot space. So the battery got moved up to there. And the nitrous ran over here on a rail. Yeah, I took all that out. Didn't like it. She's a sweet old girl. She's got a few little hiccups. One thing that I don't like is we don't have an ashtray. So we're looking for an ashtray. So I don't know if the 65 Belvedere shares an ashtray with like satellites or any of those other frames from the same vintage. You muscle car guys hopefully know, and someone can find me one. We're looking for one. The old radio had been butchered in there 10 or so different times, so I made this nice little panel for the nitrous. It all lights up when it's activated, so all of these have a nice blue background light that fires up when you hit the nitrous button, so when it's armed, the gauge is lit up as well as the buttons. I converted this crappy old oil pressure gauge, which was unreadable. Might have been an amps gauge. Anyway, shoved it in the lathe, spun it up, machined the guts out of it, and put a twin USB drive in there, so now he can charge his phone while he's hacking down the road doing whatever it is that he wants to do. Pretty much nothing on the dash works, so we're actually looking at putting a race dash in it. I have mixed feelings about that, but we're going to keep the original dash. I'll just 3D scan it and we'll go from there and build a 3D print one. Monster Taco will probably stay just for the muscle car sort of look, even though it'll have the dash. Don't know yet. I've got some wiring down here I want to redo and change a few different things, so it's all out and looking like, you know, spaghetti, but that's all good. That'll all tidy up quite nicely when we're done, so she's coming together quite nicely. So those asking about the motor, I've had a few inboxes about the motor, so I'll go into that a little bit of detail. So it is a factory 440 steel crank in it. From the numbers on the block, the Mopar boys are telling me this is a really late 440. It had TRW forged pistons, looked like they were made in the early 80s, and it did have about 150, 180 shot of nitrous on it. So we kept the nitrous, even though it's been completely replumbed, just because the car had it. The owner liked the idea. I don't mind the idea either, to be honest. So it's got 9-to-1 compression pistons, it's got forged rods, we kept steel crank, all new fresh bottom end, went trick flow heads, and if we had started the build before I bought that and built those, I probably would have gone to a completely different head and a different turbo, but this is where we are. So the build sheet originally was just turbo, have some fun and call it a day, and then head gaskets failed before we even got the screw boost in on it. I'm guessing too much nitrous over its past life. So out you come, and this is where we're at. So the turbos are Garrett's 3076s. They're too small for the job now, so we're just going to max them clean out, and we're hoping it lands 680, 750 wheel horsepower, somewhere around there. When they're done, they're done. That's all there is. Hitting the nitrous at that point would be probably pointless because there's just not enough gas flow through the turbine, so where do you know we're going to kill them? There was room in here when I built this. The pipes are over here. I've got some 3.5-inch pipes. So there is room there to go to a 35R frame, so something bigger with more power. If he wants to do it down the track, we'll investigate that. The radiator's not coping, so it's going to come apart and either find out why it's... I know it's got a few block cores, so either that or we'll aluminium it or something else. Whole box of parts. The turbos are painted the same colour as the block, just to make it blend in and have that original retro tech sort of a feel to it. There's the crank trigger. I just stole that from online and machined a hub for it, and away we went. There's an oil transducer, so if it's got low oil pressure, the computer just gets shut down. Some knock sensors go back in it, cherry sensor, etc. All the other stuff, bits and pieces, boost pipes. Alternator I had checked because of all the load on the electrics. We tested it. It was making from memory, about 90 amps at 1800 RPM, so that's more than enough for this. When you bump the RPM up a bit more, it went to about 110 amps, so even with all the fans, etc. that we've added, it still makes enough power. So here's the scrubber in here for the turbos. So both turbos feed through this before it goes back into the cooling system. Just try and dump some temperature. Like I said, we do struggle with temperature on this. I'm hoping a bigger radiator, if that's a doable thing, will help that. Under this guard, we've got the same thing, but this is for the auto, because we know it's going to have a hard life. We wanted to control temps as much as we can. It's got hard line, runs down to the gearbox. So we're all sort of coming along. It's going to be a nice, very healthy, punchy piece of hardware. So I'm pretty keen to get this going again. Yeah, I don't know if there's much more I can tell you about this at this point. Looks good, goes well. Looking forward very much so to leaving some snail trails at the traffic lights. That's probably the main game of this thing at the moment. So at the moment I'm just trying to muscle this back in. This is actually a 6-cylinder K-frame, and you can see the sump sitting right on top of it at the moment. And I've got to go a long way back, so I need a few more tools to slide this in and make it all work. It came out of there, so it's got to go back in there. This is, I think, the fourth sump we've put on this motor, trying to make it fit. Because it's a 6-cylinder K-frame and the mounts are not the correct mounts for this motor in this frame, I think is what the Mopar boys are telling me. The motor actually sits forward, so we had a hell of a job with the pan and the pickup and all that drama. So pretty keen to see the end of that. Temp sensor here just feeds the water pump. Just got a Davies Craig controller in the glove box. It's all happy days. It's all tight, it's all tech. Looks cool. Good old Belvedere. Oh yeah, it drives like a tank. It really does. And you brake well before you need to. We may have to investigate some way of getting more brake in this thing. It's one heck of a motor. Anyway, that's a bit of an update. That's where we're at. Please stop asking so many silly questions. I'll do a full build video when we're done, I suspect, and get it running and get the power done. Happy days.